I was going to talk about one subject, but I was told by counsel not to talk about that subject, so I'm going to talk about another subject. One of the best moments, I'm talking top 3 moments of my life, happened to me when I was 10 years old. When I was 10 years old, I was in the 5th grade and I was in a math class. You know, the typical, nothing special elementary school shit. And this moment happened, 39 years ago. And I still remember it in great detail. It was one of the culminating and defining experiences of my lifetime. It is an insignificant moment, and yet it was filled with everything that I am. And I'm going to tell you all about it. We were sitting at our desks with our book open, and the teacher would go through the book, the textbook, and select a question, and we would do it. And we were divided, I think, into 2 teams. And whichever team got the answer first would get a point. And I don't know, there was some prize or something like that at the end of it. Anyway, I was the star of my team, although nobody liked me, because I kept getting the answer first and I kept getting it right every single time, because I just liked math and I'm very competitive. And so what would happen was the teacher would say, question number 3, okay? And he'd start to read it, and I'd just skim ahead and start doing the answer, and I'd get it first. And I'd shoot my hand up, me. And the teacher would point at me. He was like this sort of like rotund kind of guy, like late 30s, early 40s, I would guess. He had sort of like a squat head and sort of like balding on top, and with glasses, like gold rimmed glasses. Very 70s. This was 1978. He would consistently point to me, and I would get the answer right every time. And my team was winning, and it was lopsided, and I was just over the moon, because I kept getting the answer right. It just satisfied some deep-seated need or feeling that I had, right? So anyway, we got to this one question, and it was about the amount of gold in all of the oceans. It said something like, I forget the exact wording, but it said something like, for instance, there are, 0.2 grams of pure gold per cubic kilometer of water in the ocean, and the surface of of all the oceans is X, and the depth, the average depth is Y, and so how many bars of gold are there in the world's oceans, something like that. And so I raced through the problem, got to the answer, shot my hand up, yelling me. And the teacher pointed, and I gave the response. And the teacher looked at the textbook, at the teacher's textbook, which of course had all the answers already written out. I remember they were like bright red. And he pointed and looked at the answer, and he looked at me and he said, "No, that's not correct." And I was shocked, right? A kid on the other team got an answer different from mine. And he shot up his hand, and the teacher pointed, and he said a different answer. And the teacher looked at the book and said, "That is correct." And so I did the question again, okay? While they were talking about, I forget what precisely, but I did it all again for a second time. And I came to the same result. And I said, and I don't know why I said this, I said, the textbook is wrong. The textbook is wrong. And the teacher looked at me, and I remember he was a kind man. And he looked at me and he said, "No, that's the answer of the textbook, And there was back and forth, and finally he said, "Well, why don't you come up here and show us your work?" And I went up to the front, and I could feel everybody in the class was not really happy about this. They just wanted to go on to the next question. They didn't want to be like grinding on the same problem. But I knew I was right. I knew it. I'd done it twice. I knew I was right. Everybody sort of like looked at me like, as I walked up to the front of the class, and I picked up a piece of chalk and started writing out my work, doing the same problem again for the 3rd time. And I did it all, and I got to the answer, and it was the same answer as I'd done the 2 times before, right? And the teacher looked at the answer and looked at the textbooks, and then he started doing the whole thing, looking it over and looking at my work, and then he started doing it right next to my work. And he came to the same answer that I had. And we all realized that the book was wrong. The thing is, see, I was so happy. because I had been right. I knew I was right. And everybody in the class, I could feel them. They were so unhappy. I didn't understand why. I mean, because I was a boy, of course. I was a 10-year-old child. But I thought to myself, I got it right. This is the right answer. The book is wrong. And this trivial moment of 40 years ago, practically, this trivial, insignificant moment, it must have been maybe 10, 15 minutes in a math class of a bunch of fifth graders. It turned out to be one of the most important moments of my life, and I'll explain why. You see, to me, the right answer was more important than being popular, was more important than than eluding the negative looks of all my classmates. It was more important to be right. And that turned out to be one of the defining characteristics of my life. I was more interested in being proven right, or wrong, as the case may be, than to go along with what everybody else wanted. I didn't care what anybody else wanted. I wanted to know what was the truth. It wasn't even in a sense of like meting out justice or anything like that. It was just to know what was true. And it was so weird. It was only decades later, when I was in my 30s, that I realized that one of my favorite pieces of music, the 2112 Suite by Rush, is about the same thing. I was like 35, and I was driving along one day, and I thought about, Rush's 2112. I was humming it along. For some reason, either the radio didn't work, or I didn't want to listen to the radio, or there was nothing on, or something like that. And I was humming along to myself, and all of a sudden it popped into my head that the story of 2112, right, about the guy who finds a guitar, and he loves the guitar, and he plays the guitar, and it's fantastic, right? And all the other people just hate him for it, and they dismiss him for it. The priests of the temples of Syrinx dismiss him for it, right? And that authority says one thing, and he says another. The textbook says one answer, and I said another, and it was so weird. At 35, I had this insight. I've been listening to 2112 since I was like 12, 13 years old, right? 13 years old. And this incident with the math textbook happened when I was 10 years old, and yet oddly, for 2+ decades, I didn't make that connection. My favorite piece of music was basically about that math class. It was so weird, right? And I realized that being right is more important. Being right, finding the truth, is more important. Now, I've read up on the psychology of this, and I've been told by people who are more learned than I am that it's quite common and quite natural. It's an observed psychological phenomena that people hate it when the individual is right and the group is wrong. They hate it. And they despise that outsider who is right. They hate him with a passion. And they will make it clear to him over and over. And the more right he is, the more they will hate him for it. I guess it's a question of how you want to live your life. Do you want to live with, an easy life, part of a group that believes just a bunch of bullshit, perhaps? I mean, just real, ridiculous nonsense. Believes perhaps in corruption, real corruption. Believes perhaps in lies, real lies, lies that affect people. Do you want to live under the spell of the group of people who believe lies and who believe the people who tell the lies? Or do you want to know the truth? It's a fair question, because it's comforting to live among a group of happy fools who think things that aren't true. It's comforting. It's nice to be in a social group that accepts you. It's just fantastic, really. To be a part of a group that all think the same, a collective, that all thinks the same, and nobody really has to question anything, and nobody has to think for themselves, and everybody just goes along. They go along with the textbook, they go along with the priests, they go along with the leader, a leader who might be corrupt, a leader who might be not what he portrays himself to be, and out of fear of being discovered, acts in ways that are I don't know. These are questions for people wiser than myself. No, maybe it's more accurate to say, I guess it's really a question that each person has to answer for themselves. Whether they want to follow a book or some priests or a leader and close their eyes and just follow along blindly like zombies, like mummies. Mummies are zombies after all. Or do they want to walk around with their eyes open? Do you want to walk around with your eyes open and asking for yourself, what is the truth? I prefer to be right and to be hated. That's where I stand.